Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Arreguin, Mayor of the City of Berkeley, and I'm joined by District 1 Councilmember Rashi Kesarwani, and we're here tonight to discuss the future of the Pacific Steel casting site and to get your input on the future of that site and what are the right uses for those properties on the Pacific Steel site. I want to thank the Berkeley rep for hosting us this evening, and I want to thank our planning department, who's represented by Planning Manager Steve Buckley, who will be speaking very shortly, our Economic Development Office, including our manager, Jordan Klien, who will be speaking very shortly as well. And we also have representatives from Cushman and Wakefield, who are the broker for the Pacific Steel properties, the 8.3 acres of properties. And so they'll be speaking very shortly around the process for the disposition of the properties. So I know there's been a lot of questions around that. So if we go to the next slide. Just to go over the agenda for tonight. First, we're going to present on the neighborhood characteristics around Pacific Steel and the condition of the existing buildings. And then our planning department will talk about the existing zoning. Our Office of Economic Development will talk about manufacturing trends in the city of Berkeley. And Cushman and Wakefield will talk a little bit about the timeline for the disposition of the property. And then we want to open it up for your comments, your ideas around the future of these this 8.3 acre site. What are the right uses? How can we redevelop the site to include new forms of manufacturing? So the purpose of tonight is to elicit community feedback and input on the future of the Pacific Steel casting site. And we're interested in hearing from the community and stakeholders about possible uses of those properties, including new forms of manufacturing. The Pacific Steel casting site is comprised of approximately 8.3 acres of industrially developed land. The site is bounded by Gilman to the north, the railroad tracks to the east, Page Street to the south, and Frontage Road to the west. And Interstate 80 is located on the west side of the property. The 2nd Street runs in between north and south of the property. Camellia Street also runs partially between the site from east and west and dead ends into what we know as Plant 2. And other industrial facilities surround the site or within the immediate vicinity. Next slide, please. The site includes several manufacturing and storage warehouses constructed of different materials. The buildings occupy approximately 265,000 square feet on approximately 73% of the site, with the remaining portions of the site consisting of asphalt parking lots and limited landscaping. So this really constitutes the majority of the 8.3 acre site. And the area immediately surrounding the site is primarily commercial and industrial. The Pacific Steel casting site was generally thought of as 4 distinct areas of industrial activity, but technically it's 10 different parcels, as you see here, all under one ownership. And all these 10 parcels will be potentially sold by Cushman and Wakefield and Arreguin. So on the existing site conditions, we actually took a tour with the trustee of the property on February 25th, and all the plants are completely shut down. In fact, they closed the end of last year. Almost all of the large equipment has been sold and is otherwise off-site, although some equipment remains. And all the structural elements of the buildings are intact, and there is no current plan for demolition of the properties. And Councilmember Kesarwani is going to speak a little bit about the next steps in the process and on some recent actions the council took around ensuring a clean and livable environment around the Pacific Steel property.
Thank you so much, Mayor Arreguin. My name is Rashi Kesarwani. As the mayor noted, I am the council member for the district in which this Pacific Steel casting site is located. I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. We're really excited and eager to hear your input on future uses of this site. I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us to think about new and interesting manufacturing uses, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our economic development manager about what that looks like in the 21st century. And as the mayor noted, we as a council are taking actions to address the state of our public commons. Many of us drive along East Shore Highway and we see the bulky debris and trash, as well as the encampments and RVs that are currently located there. The Gilman Underpass currently has a lot of debris and trash, as well as people who are unsheltered. We recognize that this is a really serious problem for our community as well as for our region. And so we are looking at long-term actions that we can take to address the crisis of homelessness, as well as immediate urgent actions that we can take to ensure that our streets are clean and livable. And so I just want to tell you briefly that on Thursday night we had a special council meeting and we passed what we're calling the Clean and Livable Commons initiative. We're very fortunate to have some one-time dollars from the state that we are putting towards some additional staff resources in order to enhance the city's ability to quickly clear the bulky debris and litter from our public streets. And this is really, we did this with West Berkeley in mind. We know that for whatever reason, West Berkeley has become a dumping ground, and we need to really address this problem. Another thing we're doing, just as sort of urgent action on our homelessness issue, we are going to be adding portable toilets and hand washing stations because basic sanitation is really important, and we just need to ensure that people have that basic access. And then finally, I did mention already the illegal dumping issue. We know this is a problem, and so what we are planning to do is add security cameras, lighting, increase signage, as well as looking at increasing the fees related to illegal dumping, because we really we need to deter this practice. I do want to say in some cases people have good intentions and they are making donations to people who are homeless, and so part of what we will be doing with this initiative is also educating the community about how you can help people who are unsheltered, because we all recognize that need, and we are all, as a council, we're working really hard to help people in need, and we are really hopeful that these actions that we took on Thursday will have an impact and a positive, make a positive difference in terms of East Shore Highway, as well as just the area around the Pacific Steel site. And then in terms of Pacific Steel casting, that site itself, we know there's going to be environmental cleanup that needs to happen, so that's going to be a really important piece. And I just want to close by saying I'm really eager to hear from the community about potential uses of this site that fit within the spirit of the West Berkeley plan, but also look to the future and look to what types of 21st century manufacturing uses might make sense. And I think we have a really exciting opportunity to revitalize this corner of Berkeley in light of the fact that we're going to be making improvements to the Gilman interchange that I think Steve is going to talk more about. So this is just a great opportunity for us to see some really, really exciting changes in this section of Berkeley.
So before I turn over to our Office of Economic Development, I just want to reiterate that the goal tonight is to hear your input, residents and businesses and other stakeholders in the community around what are the right uses of these 10 different pieces of property, the 8.3 acre Pacific Steel site. And I agree with Councilor Kesarwani. I think it provides a really exciting opportunity to really re-envision this space, to really make a dynamic hub of industrial and commercial activity that can not only add to our tax base, create jobs, but also really enliven this part of Berkeley. So I want to now turn over to our Office of Economic Development. He's going to talk, or actually our planning department, he's going to talk about the current zoning of the site.
Good evening, my name is Steve Buckley. I'm the land use planning manager for the city, and I'm just going to go over here because that's where my notes are. So yeah, the zoning for the site is M, as shown on the map there. These blocks abut the East Shore Freeway and run 2 or 3 blocks in from there. And so they include, for instance, on the north at the end there, that's the transfer station. So you have the recycling and the trash sorting. And then in that bubble is Pacific Steel Castings. And then around there are those sort of other familiar manufacturing and warehousing kinds of activities that are there now. And then to the east, just in the darker gray, is what we call a muley, which is the mixed-use light industrial. And so that's a slightly different zoning that transitions from that heavy industry up into a little bit more mixed use and then up into commercial and residential from there. So the intent has always been to sort of have this activity area that's then buffered. And those activities are really spelled out as basically manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and other kinds of production, like Pacific Steel, where you're taking a raw material and turning it into something. It also actually coincidentally allows cannabis cultivation and warehousing, contractors, arts and crafts, and also even auto sales. These each have different kinds of permit thresholds depending on the size and use. So sometimes they're allowed just by right to move into a space. Others require a certain level of use permit, which is discretionary. It means that the Zoning Adjustments Board needs to weigh the evidence and decide, is this really the right place for this use at this time? And so sometimes it might be listed in the use table in the zoning ordinance, but it's not a guaranteed use, it's something to be negotiated. We also have design review, and we also have demolition controls. So these buildings, obviously, we're going to need some rehab. So at least as far as the exterior goes, we would include the community in a discussion about any changes to the outside, like, for instance, the BMW repair facility that just opened up to the north. You know, we had a lot of back and forth about fencing and landscaping and lighting and colors and signs. And so we try to, you know, when we get an opportunity, upgrade even industrial kinds of facilities to at least make them attractive along, for instance, Gilman and the freeway. So that's kind of how the zoning and planning department gets involved. We also do have more of a long-range strategy for some of these large properties. It's called a master use permit, and that's where we allow several tenancies, several kinds of uses over time with some flexibility, so that, say, a property owner could say, well, I've got this really big building and this kind of smaller building over here, and here's my idea of how I might want to use them over the next, say, 10 or 20 years. Some of office, some manufacturing, some warehouse. And so we would, again, sort of negotiate that in public with the Zoning Adjustments Board and have a permit that would be on file that would then give that sort of certainty and flexibility kind of wrapped up into one master use permit. We also have performance standards for industrial uses, so just generally noise, air quality, glare, vibration, those sorts of things are regulated, and we work with code enforcement and other agencies to try to make sure that even industrial uses are at least, you know, good neighbors to the extent they can be. We also work with, for instance, the Air Resources Board, the Water Quality Board, and others who have enforcement authority over other things. And just finally, I guess the toxics department in a sister department of mine actually also oversees some cleanup, and so they coordinate with other state agencies, and they try to have a cleanup plan in place before a new user would go in, so that over time we're able to rectify historic problems and make things better going forward. So that's kind of planning in a nutshell.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jordan Klien. I'm Manager of Economic Development for the City of Berkeley. So you just heard the site is zoned for manufacturing, so I'm going to talk a little bit about trends in manufacturing in Berkeley and also some of the other economic drivers in Berkeley. So manufacturing is really important to Berkeley. It provides about 4,000 jobs, which is about 6% of the total employment in Berkeley. So here's employment in manufacturing in Berkeley from 1991 all the way to 2017. And In the 90s, there was steadily about 5,000 jobs in manufacturing. In about 2000, that began to decline, and over the course of 10 years, we lost almost 40% of our manufacturing jobs in Berkeley. It fell to just a little bit over 3,000. But then, interestingly, in the last 5 or 7 years, we've seen a rebound. And you can see the line going back up. And we've gotten back up to about 4,000 manufacturing jobs in Berkeley. Now, a lot of that rebound has been driven by food and beverage manufacturing. Maybe you've heard about some of the great breweries and wineries that have opened up in West Berkeley in the past few years. In 2012, we had about 25 firms employing about 350 people in food and beverage manufacturing. And just in 5 years to 2017, those numbers doubled. Pretty interesting. Also, I should note, even as we've seen that rebound, we've seen heavy manufacturing, metals and machinery manufacturing, continue to decline. Whereas that was once really a central pillar of our manufacturing sector, it's down to just a few hundred jobs in that kind of heavy manufacturing in West Berkeley. We've heard that food and beverage firms, advanced manufacturing firms, and other light industrial firms are often looking for smaller spaces than heavy manufacturers may typically require. There are a few examples in Berkeley of larger spaces, 50,000 square feet and greater, that have been broken up into smaller floor plates to accommodate multiple different firms. Finally, I also wanted to note, at least, that a lot of the job growth and demand for commercial space in West Berkeley is driven by our life sciences and biotech sectors. It's a really important job cluster for Berkeley. And those sectors do, in fact, create not just white-collar and science jobs, but jobs really, all kinds of jobs. So you heard from Steve that some life sciences firms may be able to locate in an M district, like if they were doing pharmaceuticals manufacturing or chemical manufacturing. But a lot of research and development firms would not be able to locate in an M district. I'll stop there, and I think next we're going to hear from somebody from Cushman and Wakefield.
Hello, everybody. I wasn't super prepared for remarks. Usually I have a card, but we've been marketing the property on behalf of kind of the receiver, or the pension fund advisor. What is the proper term, Matthew?
The correct term is court-appointed plan administrator.
Court-appointed.
What's your name?
My name is Ted Anderson, and I'm with Cushman & Wakefield. So,
You hold the mic up, please.
sorry, yeah. So we were hired by Matthew and his team to do the marketing for the facility. That process was undertaken about a year ago. So we've been marketing for about a year. And you might ask, well, why hasn't anything happened in about a year? And the reality was, we had Pacific Steel that was in an ongoing operation, and we couldn't get the environmental work on the site completed until they had stopped the operations. And they did not cease operations until about mid-November. So in mid-November, we were able to kind of move forward with our action plan for the environmental review. That is in process and should reach an end here pretty quickly, maybe as soon as this week. So our plan from here, and just to give you a sense, we've had dozens of tours. Users, a couple, but mostly developer interests that would like to see something change and create new space and new opportunities for new businesses, which I think is a good thing. And I really appreciate everybody being out here tonight because we're here to hear your voices, because when we're talking to these buyers, it's really important that we're able to kind of tell them what the community vibe is, what the community is looking for, and particularly in a community like Berkeley. So I really appreciate that. So we will probably, if everything goes to plan and the environmental gets to us as expected, we'll probably do a call for offers at the end of this month, which will be the 29th, I think. And then the process of kind of vetting the buyer pool again. And that could take a couple of months. but we'll hopefully have, a number of parties that are interested to kind of drive the value of the site. And then we will pick a horse. We will negotiate terms of the contract. They may require some due diligence on their own to further quantify, any sort of issues or things that they may want to get their arms around. And then we'll move to close escrow, transfer the ownership to a new entity who hopefully has a plan that's in line with the whims and wishes of the city of Berkeley. And we can bring you something that's a little bit more meaningful than, just a bunch of old metal buildings that, quite frankly, aren't the best gateway, into a city such as Berkeley. So, although a lot of people, to be frank, think there's a lot of revalue in terms of repurposing those structures, but reskinning them, repainting them, giving them a little bit more vibrance than they have right now.
Would you assume that these buyers are still assuming that it's going to be Zone M?
I think,
Or
as we sit here,
are you all sitting here thinking that maybe it could be rezoned?
above my pay grade. I mean,
No, I'm asking now the city council. I mean, because buying it as a Zone M implies X. Buying it to rezone implies an entirely different set of circumstances, given that more than likely your environmental review will require some pretty industrial cleanup, pretty heavy industrial cleanup.
I will tell you what we were telling everybody that comes to take a look at it. We're zoned M. That's what we're zoned. And I've been given no indication that there's a zoning change that's impending.
Well,
But-
to me, this meeting, the way that the flyer came out is possible uses, which means that you're open to rezoning this property. Is that true?
So we're kind of jumping ahead, because the purpose of tonight is to get input from you and other members of the community about, is the existing zoning satisfactory? Are there additional uses that are satisfactory? Right now, it's currently zoned manufacturing. I think there is a willingness and openness of myself, I'm speaking for myself and Councilmember Kesarwani, that maybe there might be some modifications to the zoning, creating maybe a zoning overlay for the 8.3 acre site. But we don't know what those additional uses might be. The whole purpose of tonight was to get input, and then the City Council will be having another meeting in May, at which point we will be getting additional community input and giving some formal direction if zoning modifications are going to be recommended to the Planning Commission, who will have to adopt zoning amendments. So right now it's zoned M. I think there's some openness to hearing community input about whether flexibility may be appropriate, and if it is, if there is a strong desire of the community to look at additional uses, maybe those uses that may be allowed in the MULI district, for example, then we need to make a formal recommendation to the Planning Commission, and we need to adopt an amendment to the zoning ordinance. But right now it's zoned M. So, yes, ma'am.
Following up on this woman's question, because the site we anticipate has some significant environmental problems, we have to be looking for a developer with deep enough pockets and a game plan to recoup that money. So we're just speaking hypothetically, we're looking for somebody who can afford to clean up the site and will create enough density on the site to do a very successful cleanup.
Yes. So,
Clean cleanup.
so if we can wait, because I want to open it up for other people to provide comments.
Yeah.
And you can either ask questions or provide comments, but the idea was for tonight was to get input around, do you think the existing M district uses are appropriate? Are there other uses that the community thinks would be appropriate for this site? I have not come to any conclusion about that. I don't think Councilmember Kesarwani has come to any conclusion about that. We want to get community input from residents and businesses and stakeholders around the Pacific Steel site about this particular matter. But right now it's zoned M. One of the things the City Council said as we sort of launched this process was that we don't think that infill housing or mixed-use residential development would be appropriate at this location.
Why?
Because of the adjacent Berkeley Tool and Forge site and the emissions and just the fact there's heavy heavy industrial uses already in the existing area.
This
So-
is a wonderful steam hammer.
So anyway, so with that, I think now would be a good time to kind of open it up for comments.
Steam hammer,
And
but it's a hammer.
I guess, why don't we start here and we'll go this way. Your question was, is the property going to be sold property by property, or is it going to be sold as one large 8.3 acre site? I think that's a...
I can
answer that.
Again, I'm Matthew English. As I said, we're the federal bankruptcy court appointed fiduciary. And we represent basically all of the creditors from the first Pacific Steel bankruptcy. So that includes employees of the first Pacific Steel. It includes people who were involved in a wages and hours class action lawsuit, and a lot of the small businesses who are all part of the original Pacific Steel. Now, you may have heard that there's been a second Pacific Steel bankruptcy very recently filed, and that is true. That is for this newest operating company that obviously has now moved out. But when we talk about the Pacific Steel bankruptcy, we represent the first bankruptcy and all of those creditors. And so we're really the custodians of the property. So your question is, would we sell it as one complete, like 10 units in one sale, or would you sell it in 10 individual, or some other combination? The short answer is that our job, what the court in bankruptcy law says, is that we have to maximize the value for all creditors. And what that means is that we don't know yet. The short answer is going to be, if we have someone who comes in and is willing to make a very strong offer for all 10 properties, and that's better than kind of the piecemeal one at a time, then we'd sell it as one large sale. Obviously, there's other opportunities as well, but at this point, it's a little too early to say, as Cushman said, we're going to be getting our offers by the end of this month, hopefully, and then at that point, we'll start to learn more about kind of what's going to be the best way to do that.
Mary Lou?
Something that could be done on a Pacific Steel casting site is to, it would be a major economic development achievement. You could put up an eco-industrial park. An eco-industrial park, you can work with the county agency stockways.org, because they know a lot about eco-industrial parks. And in an eco-industrial park, you have one manufacturer taking the discarded resources from some other manufacturer, and they take those discards and turn it into a new product. It's very organic. It's very sustainable materials recovery and resource development process. And to do it on a single site is very, very efficient. It also creates an opportunity to site multiple companies and multiple users and multiple uses in one fairly small area. And one really good use would be to take the yard debris, the mixed yard debris and discarded food that arrives at the transfer station. This is unrecoverable food. This is not what somebody can eat. This is unrecoverable, and it has to be transformed into a new resource. It has to be recycled. So in an urban area, what you can put up are in-vessel composting systems that take mixed yard debris and food and turn it into methane, which is natural gas. And you can develop natural gas in an urban area in in-vessel composting. And then when the digestion is done and the methane has been recovered, suitable for using in a whole bunch of different kinds of uses, including fueling fleets. Once you've done that, you have a product called digestate, which can also be composted and then applied to the land. And it's non-toxic. East Bay Mud knows a lot about in-vessel composting because they've done a lot of it. This is such a wonderful site for the economic development of redevelopment of American manufacturing in the 21st century, going as green as you could go. This is a perfect opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. So anyone on this side of the room?
So I actually run a manufacturing business, currently based in West Oakland. We work in event production, so we work with Alton Brown, we work with GE, we work with Doritos, we build the Oakland Library bus, if you see it around, that was us. If you go into San Francisco, a lot of the stuff done for the Department of Public Works, that was us. So to give a little context, the sheer impossibility of finding any sort of suitable space for kind of where manufacturing is headed is darn near impossible. We've been looking, Hayward to Vallejo. And I think the thing to kind of keep in mind is where the reason we can stay afloat and the reason we've grown as a company and the reason we employ more people and all that kind of thing is we use automation heavily. It's not as loud, it doesn't emit, it's not as wasteful, you can recycle side screens very easily. Super common that we use robots to do a lot of work. What that means is we don't have 1,000 people coming to site every day. We have a smaller, higher trained, they're usually people that come out of Laney. We bring them in and we teach them to go. But what that means is where we've struggled to find space isn't even so much the cost of rent for us, it's more that the spaces available are 100,000 square feet and non-subdividable, really complicated. So a gem of this particular space is it's so rare to find industrial space that would actually be suited for industrial usage that I would be really sad if it winds up being a cool looking office for people working on computers. Clearly everybody needs a place to work, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I think it's just something to say that people don't build new industrial properties anymore. So when they come available and they're on the market, keeping them zoned in a way that people who run businesses out of them would be very appreciative in the current.
How much space do you need?
We've got about 9,000 square feet.
So, sir?
Yeah. I'd like to just second what he's saying. I work in Meyer Sound. We have a manufacturing business in West Berkeley, down by the Ashby side. We started with one building 35, 40 years ago, and slowly took over building by building as people left. We were lucky enough to maintain a lot of the industry inside the Heinz building, which we've taken over most of the Heinz building. It's about a city block. But without that large footprint, like you're saying, a company can't make the next move. They'll look at Fairfield. They'll look at Vallejo. They'll look somewhere else to put a tilt up. The main idea with manufacturing in West Berkeley, as it declined, a lot of places turned into, apartments upstairs, retail, all kinds of weird little condos, and they lost a lot of consolidated printing warehouses, turned into different things. I think the idea, like he's saying, this large footprint, if you get the right buyer, the idea is that maybe there isn't anybody that wants to plop down money for the whole space. But if we start to parcel it off or this or that, the major players may not want to do that. Because real manufacturers need a big space. They need space to produce. And I think, that's the great thing about the opportunity here, is to take a look at, you could maybe divide it into a few spaces, but make sure that you are in the place to get a bigger manufacturer to come in, the footprint. I think it's really important. And to keep it in, for sure. You don't want a car salesman there. We don't want a cannabis cultivation, or a manufacturing site to keep building the manufacturing in West Berkeley. I think it's the way to go.
Thank you. Rick?
Hi, I'm the staff of WeBake, West Berkeley Artisans Industrial Company Association, and we have a number of our members here that Gary, the plant manager from Meyer Sound, is one of them, a great company, and they were able to expand because West Berkeley preserved these large spaces. And what we know is what happens in West Berkeley is businesses come in and businesses go out. Some businesses just grow so big they just have to have 300,000 square feet down in Hayward, but most businesses don't need that kind of floor plate. And so we consider saving industrial space as basically habitat for good jobs, especially for people who have difficulty finding them, and habitat for companies that produce the goods that we want to that we use every day, and steady revenue to the city also. And there's also a strong environmental case to be made for producing goods near where people use them. And I have a little sheet here. We're lucky, we feel we have a couple examples right next to the printing site, right next to the steel site was Flint Inc. And that was a large site, 130,000 square feet site, about 3 acres. That was bought 10, 15 years ago and successfully reused within the M zone. And now they've got printing companies there, they've got solar panel testing companies, they've got food companies, they've got wine companies, they've got large construction companies there. And then up the block on Gilman, we have the Pyramid Brewery. It's also been successfully reused as an industrial site. That's a different zone to Muley, but almost all the companies that are in there are companies that are M-zone companies. There's only one company that wouldn't be allowed in the M-zone that's in there. So we feel like to be able to have light manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, food sector, semiconductor, and to get what Gary said, cannabis production is allowed in the M zone. Measure T was passed by the city of Berkeley in 2010 as a referendum. The citizens voted and said, okay, we can have cannabis production, but we're going to keep it in the M zone. And that's the way the law is now. The city's been a little slow on allowing it, so I think we're very close to finally, you could actually finally go in and get a permit to do this. You haven't been up to this time, but that is just allowable use. And the other thing that happened was there is an auto uses overlay on the zone, so unless something changes right now, an auto dealership could go on to the Flint site. And you know, what we found is there's enormous demand for arts and crafts production, and what is allowed there, you know, arts and crafts studios. The East Berkeley has now between like a 2% and a 3.5% vacancy rate on manufacturing and warehouse space. So there's enormous demand. Almost every square inch is filled with really interesting productive activity of every different sort. So there's great demand. Berkeley has the highest industrial rents also, about $1.60 a square foot. So you can make it work if you get a site for what is actually working, and what the zoning will allow. It'll pencil out for you. And so we feel that the zoning as exists, you can have an incredibly interesting complex of different uses there. And there was one other thing that my gray hair, I get a minute to figure out what I've done. Anyway, we think it's a great opportunity, and it can be very successful. Oh yeah, when the West Berkeley project happened between 2005 and 2012, one of the positive things our organization feels that came out of it was we created the ability to demise, to break up space really easily. So now you can go in, you have 100,000 square foot space, you can go up to the zoning counter and say, I want to make that into all 5,000 square foot spaces or 22,000 square foot spaces, and they just say, okay, and they just sign a piece of paper, and you can do it. So you can take these large spaces and break them up really easily, so you can change them large to small, small to large, really easily to accommodate when a company that grows and needs more space. Okay, we're going to knock out these walls. So this is a great space, and very huge idea of a recycling, complex. Basically recycling materials and make finished products out of it. You know, we don't have to have a situation like we had with Pacific Steel, where they were making valuable products and they had a lot of great jobs, but unfortunately, it was a burden on the local community and what happened with the emissions. We don't want to see that. Our organization doesn't support that situation. We're not going to have that again. And you know, there's a lot of talk about 21st manufacturing and advanced manufacturing and what that is. And I actually Googled a whole bunch of that, and I have a whole sheet with about 5 different definitions of what advanced manufacturing is. And so no, I think it's like this amorphous thing that's out there that's going to save the world. But basically, you know, we intuitively know what it is. It's using computers and, you know, to you know, to make production be efficient and, you know, possibly robotics. And, you know, it's making things, but it's making things with new methodology. And so it's, and we're all for advanced manufacturing. There's no reason it shouldn't. And all manufacturing now has a research and development component, and we understand it should be there. And we support that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Steve and then back to you. Dan?
Yes, I'd like to just talk for a minute about urban water and how we started. We've been going now 38 years in Berkeley. We started at the City of Berkeley landfill with nothing. And we were there for 3 years until the landfill closed. We had nowhere to go. But the city was planning on building a garbage burning incinerator at 2nd and Gilman, and that got stopped by voter action. They didn't want the burner. So we moved on to that site. We took over 66,000 square feet on that site. That was our second move. Down the way, we also were on 4th and Harrison at one point. We also were on 6th and Gilman. And now we're on 7th and Ashby. So we've moved a total of 5 times. And this supports the gentleman that spoke earlier, that we need to be able to move, and each time we move, we reconfigured, we learn more. We did a whole lot of different things to make our operation much more streamlined and efficient. We're now known around the world as a reuse enterprise that really makes a difference. We have people coming from all over the world to see us, and they will come to this transfer station too, because it will be a draw. Last thing I want to say is that you've just lost in Berkeley a really wonderful business. It was right across the street from us. The owner is Jim Perotti. He's about my age or a little younger maybe. He's been at it for a long time. His business was taking urban street trees, mostly redwoods, up to 6 feet wide in diameter, 10 or so feet long. Every one of them weighs many, many tons. And he would slab them. He would use, he developed a technology with elastomills, and he made slabs. And then those slabs would be stickered on the site, and then after that they would be finished, and he sold those products. They were benches and tables and all sorts of things to high-end markets for $2,000 up to $7,000 or $8,000 a piece. So this was a very, and the last 2 years of his existence before he moved out of Berkeley were the best he'd ever had, 2017, 2018. He came across the street to us and talked to us. McBeath Hardware, Hardwood, was the landlord. They kicked him out. He'd been there 40 years, and he was given 30 days to get out. So now he's up in Clear Lake, but I don't know whether he'd be able to move back or not. But that was a viable business niche, and it was something that was it was also a form of recycling and a form of manufacturing at the same time. And it was doing very high-end work. And that's the type of business I think that you would have in this. And I think it would just be a wonderful thing that we're developed. And I do want to say that each of the speakers that has already spoken, I totally agree with them. I did work on the West Berkeley plan, and I know that there's a lot of people that are here that are very committed to it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify, the company he was talking about is Artisan Burlwood.
That's right.
It was on Ashby for 40 years, and they got 30 days notice bank. But the trees that they were turning into beautiful, beautiful tables, beautiful furniture, those trees would not be accepted by mills because they might have metal spikes and things in them, and it makes them unsuitable for a big mill. So without them, those trees will go to the mill.
So we're going to go over here and then come back to John. Yeah?
So what I've heard so far is a number of businesses that sound really interesting.
Could you stand up so we can hear you?
What I've heard so far are a number of really interesting businesses that create a lot of really interesting products. And some of them are startups, and some of them start as startups and grow. But I think my first point that I came in and made was that we need for this site to be cleaned up. It's a brown field right now. So I urge you to get your head into the mind space of thinking of who can afford to clean it up. And think about that possibility as you think about what this site could be. I don't see any housing advocates here tonight, but for a site where we could have several hundred people working, we could have thousands of people living. And I'd like to hear from the city why housing has been ruled out from the get-go.
Well, Councilmember Meyer and I, former Councilmember Meyer and I, who brought an item forward last fall to start this process, in the actual item that directed our city manager to work with my office to initiate a community planning process for Pacific Steel, we felt that residential uses were not appropriate for the site given the heavy industry that exists in the immediate area, including Berkeley Tool and Forge, which is still in operation, and also the level of remediation that would be needed for residential uses is far greater than it would be for industrial uses. And so it would require significantly more time and more expense for an owner of the property to remediate to a residential standard. So given the location in a heavily industrial area with existing industrial uses, also our existing zoning, our West Berkeley plan, and our general plan talk about focusing development along San Pablo and along major transit corridors and using our industrial zones for manufacturing. And I think our intent is to move forward in providing direction to the buyer to look at the use of these sites consistent with the spirit and the language of the West Berkeley plan.
So the plan of densifying along transit corridors is going to cause 4, 5, and 6-story buildings alongside 1-story residential homes. There's going to be significant political pushback on that scheme. And a site like this, which is more isolated, you can create very dense housing without the political ramifications. I mean, think about how tough it is to build a 5-story building next to a little single-family house. People don't like it. Really, they don't like it a lot. So I think this site, given that it's going to be so expensive to clean up, even for a proper commercial use, much less I mean, what I'm hearing you saying is, oh, we're going to let them leave it polluted because it's very expensive to clean. No, I know, you're not saying that. But if
I didn't say that.
we're not going to require them to clean it up to the residential standard, and then we'll let a manufacturing use go in there. I'm saying, let's clean it up to the highest standard possible, and that can only be done by bringing in a large developer who has a vision for creating fairly dense, probably mixed-use development.
So I hear that you think housing is appropriate at this location. So we will take note of that. In the conversations that we've had with Cushman and Wakefield, I think their intention was to market these properties to a developer who would redevelop the property for a variety of light industry, light manufacturing uses. I don't think there's ever been any discussion of looking at residential at this particular location, given the proximity to the I-80 freeway and the existing industrial uses. So I don't know whether that's been presented to any prospective buyers, or that's the intent of how these properties are being marketed or sold. But I hear your interest in that housing would be appropriate at this location.
I've lived downwind from all these places we're talking about for 20 years, and my son had significant asthma, and I feel very strongly that we don't really need manufacturing in Berkeley. I know that's a very unpopular sentiment in this room, but my son suffered significant health effects from living downwind of Flint Inc., from living downwind of these steel manufacturing businesses, and from living downwind of AC Transit with their heavy diesel exhaust. My neighborhood is very heavily impacted by these uses, and it's hard for us to enjoy our residential use with these conflicting industrial uses nearby.
Thank you. Sir?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the property is in an earthquake liquefaction zone, which must have an impact not only on the buyers, but also on what do you want to have there, which to my mind would eliminate residential development. Is that correct? It is.
I don't know, I'd have to defer to Cushman and Wakefield on that one.
We're at the corner of East Shore and Page at the paper shredding company, and our building is in a liquefaction zone.
I don't know if anyone from the planning department or Cushman and Wakefield does.
That can be,
We don't know anything, I don't think.
We don't know.
Definitively, we haven't had a soil report, I mean, it's assumed that it's filled and.
It is.
Yeah, I believe it's on film.
It is.
Okay.
what's more
Yeah.
expensive?
As I look at the pamphlet from Cushman, as I look at the pamphlet from Cushman and Wakefield, I mean, I guess I'm not of high enough caliber in the world to get the prices. You know, I'm nobody, but I'd sure like to see what parcel 5 would sell for, because there might be a group of investors that could do something like what you were talking about with the recycle on parcel 5 with minimal cleanup for parcel 5. But as I speak with these gentlemen, they want to know who I am and what my interest is, and it's all one, and I'm not getting the warmest reception that, okay, so how much is parcel 5? How much is parcel 4? You know, if you want the whole kit and caboodle, how much is it? You know, maybe I got a friend that has that money. I don't know.
To answer your question, I think the fundamental problem is we do not have our arms wrapped around what the environmental realities are of the site.
Right,
And what,
so-
the remediation
So
costs
right now,
might
if
be.
I wanted to buy it without the environmental ramifications, what's the total price?
Well, you can't really figure it, ma'am.
Okay, then how can you sell it?
Well, we're in the process of getting the environmental reports that are
Okay,
necessary to
so
quantify
how do we
those
get,
costs.
how do we get the environmental reports? And are there only special people that you've allowed to tour that are going to get the reports? I mean, I'd like to see the reports myself. And I'd like to see, okay, is parcel 6 something that we could put a recycling thing on if 20 of us bought it? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not Donald Trump or anywhere near. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you're most right. But I don't have that kind of money. But I may have enough money for parcel 5. In which case, there may be things that, given the biotech and the nanotech that can clean up now, it may not be cleaned up this year, but it could very well be cleaned up within the next 10 years with little old gobbledygook people that go there and clean it up. I've seen it happen. And maybe there's people that would like to buy a parcel here and a parcel there, but there's no prices. So once you get the environmental reports, will there be prices on these parcels?
So the way in which you sell a property in this sort of sophisticated property is not that we put a price on every property. We go out to the market and we say, we ask the market to speak to us and we say, what would you like to purchase it for? So look, we would be absolutely willing, you have my card now, if you would like to come to Cushman and Wakefield and submit a bid on one of these properties, and that is perfectly acceptable. That's how this process works.
Okay, and then I get to see the environmental reports? Or do I get to see them beforehand?
When they're done, yeah.
Figure it's $1.75 a square foot.
You'll have to sign an NDA.
Go from
A
there.
what?
You'll have to sign a non-disclosure.
Oh, Jesus.
Meaning that I can't tell people how toxic it is?
Meaning you are signing a disclosure agreement.
About what?
That the information is for your use. Information is for your use in determining your valuation of said property.
Okay.
Which is just a standard process. How it's always.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, that's not how I bought my house.
So,
but-
ma'am, I'm going to suggest, I want to make sure we get to other people, and maybe you can ask these questions of Cushman and Wakefield after
Thank you.
we wrap up, but I want to make sure we're able to get other comments. I think John Kroll wanted to make some comments.
Well, I'm actually retired now, but I spent over 40 years as a cabinet maker in West Berkeley, and I still live very close by here. My shop, which is Hartman Cooperative Wood Shop, started here on Gilman Street in 1974. It was a big building on Dwight and 8th Street. which had been the Sealy mattress factory, and that closed down, and it was able to subdivide for industrial uses. And since that time, until today, is really just an incredibly creative center for arts and crafts and many related small industries. And I think, with the fitting in with the West Berkeley plan, that really is what we should turn this area into. Many people in the rest of Berkeley, they drive through West Berkeley to get to the highway to get somewhere else. But West Berkeley is interior. You don't see what's going on inside the places. So many people who don't have a connection to West Berkeley really never get a chance to see just how incredibly creative numerous spaces are here, and many industrial spaces are, and what the contribution that it makes to Berkeley. So right now I'm speaking as a stakeholder, as somebody who no longer has an industrial business, but is a resident of Berkeley. And I think the industrial zone of Berkeley, particularly the Muley with the arts and crafts and light industry, gives it an incredible contribution to the whole of Berkeley, which is often not recognized by many people who don't really connect down here. Because in many ways, if not for West Berkeley, if not for the industrial zones, Berkeley would tend to become a bedroom community, middle class and upward scaling bedroom community like El Cerrito or Albany, which are fine as they are, but Berkeley has this diversity, this complexity. It's like a very rich stew with many different flavors in it. And many of those flavors come from West Berkeley. And you destroy West Berkeley, you're going to destroy the diversity of the entire city. And many people will not realize what they've lost until it's gone. And they see Emeryville today, and I don't want to knock Emeryville, but Berkeley is much more than just a sterile bedroom community. It has a kind of diversity and dynamism which runs in this area, and I think we should do everything we possibly can to protect that and use this opportunity. This is an enormous opportunity to create an area which is revitalized in a way that the entire city will benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, George?
Hi, George Martin. I'm a third-generation owner of our machine builder in both in Emeryville and Berkeley. We're split about half and half. I heard about this meeting and saw what the plans were, and quite frankly, I got quite excited because this is a great opportunity for Berkeley to continue with the idea of the Berkeley plan. We're located half in Emeryville, half in Berkeley. We are stretched to limit. I can't, in our area, buy or rent a piece of property reasonably for our expansion, and we're desperately trying to do that. And I see this piece possibly maybe subdividing or doing something that could, for us, give us an opportunity to expand further into Berkeley, or perhaps not. But when the subject comes up of, well, how do you do this with this kind of property? I can tell you next door to us is a building, this monolith called, it used to be called the Marchand Building, and it was bought by LBA developers. This is just a gigantic building, but they were smart enough to develop it into small pieces. You have Power Bar, you have Cliff Bar, you have Cho Chocolate, you have a gym up in the front, I think it's City Sports, you have your health group in there. This has been divided into a lot of great things. Not manufacturing, not industrial, but it wasn't zoned for that. It was zoned for this. And rather than going to one big buyer, they went and split it up, and they're extraordinarily successful doing this. So I see such great opportunity here in the industrial side to take a building like this or buildings and utilize it for smaller manufacturers, people that are just coming into an industry and have an opportunity to get a small piece to just start a business. This is great.
Thank you. We go here, and then we'll go in the back.
Great. So I'm Catherine Stepanski. I just found out about this meeting despite having spoken out about the pollution in this community for several years. We've been at the table before you know that we have a bunch of people who are concerned about pollution. I'm not sure why the mayor didn't reach out, but at least we're here now. Thank you for letting me speak. So Pacific Steel Casting might be closed, but there are people who are deported and should own the property, in my opinion, because they had their whole family's lives ruined by having a company kick them out of the country when they gave themselves for that company that did them wrong. So that's one thing. Another thing is that Berkeley Forge is still operating. I see their plume almost every single day. So this land is polluted, we already know that, but it's constantly being polluted, and our neighborhood is being polluted. There's also CMEX, Berkeley asphalt, and the area is so polluted that Lonnie Hancock and Shirley Dean and a bunch of other politicians actually signed off for Beirut Roxtenpour and his family to leave due to the pollution in the 1990s, paid them to leave due to the pollution. That is something that the city is aware of, and that it was so polluted back in the 90s, and that was before all these additional years of pollution. So of course the site needs to be cleaned up. We shouldn't be bringing other people into a space that we know has carcinogens. The amount of chemicals there, the pile of paperwork just to see the chemical spec sheets is shocking. And that's only what was disclosed to us, because there's other things that are being created that NDAs make it so we're not even being told are there. So selling a property right now without cleaning it up first is immoral and wrong to this community. And so whoever it is who's sitting in this room who wants to sell it, you need to clean it first and then deal with it. And it should go to the people who were kicked out of this country because they gave their lives with it. Cancer Alley, West Berkeley is Cancer Alley. I live on a block with 10 houses, and I already know at least 5 people who have caught cancer. My child has been exposed because I've been told by the city that we can't leave due to a contract. So there is a lawsuit going on with the city of Berkeley, and on March 15th, we're going to be in Hayward having our case management conference. There's a lot going on with pollution, and continually ignoring the pollution is wrong, it's immoral, it's unethical, and it's something that we can't have happen if we want to have artists in West Berkeley, because too many people have been getting sick. So I really think that whoever owns this land should do the right thing. We need to hold people accountable, and before we can do anything with the land, it must be remediated.
Thank you, Steve.
From Mullen today, that Rashi, you said from Jordan, about Economic Office of Development. And so I know that you guys in this council can do zoning adjustments or look at them versus other things, and then we have the market driven. People might be bidding on it, that's kind of separate as long as it's M. So I'm wondering what else the city can do in terms of the Office of Economic Development and offering support like you're doing for other small businesses to that site should it come up. Like what other things are you doing potentially helping to make it available to other businesses?
Sure. So the Office of Economic Development assists businesses, entrepreneurs, artists, and community organizations to access services, feel welcome in Berkeley, and thrive. And we offer a range of services to businesses of all sizes, from a solo entrepreneur all the way up to our largest private sector employers in Berkeley. One of the core services that we offer to small businesses is help navigating the city. As some of you may know, the city could be a difficult place to navigate. Sometimes it's hard to figure out who you need to call in order to get the permit. You can always call 311 and get directed to the right place. But we work directly with business owners to help them understand local codes and figure out who they should be talking to, when and where. And so if a prospective business was considering moving onto this site, that's the kind of service we might provide. We also have a revolving loan fund that we assist with financing for small businesses. We do green business certification. I'd be happy to follow up with you. But ultimately we try to meet every business where they are and provide customized services that meet their needs.
I wonder if the people that are bidding know that. Could Cushman make that people aware of that now? Is all these other cities? Okay.
I'll just say that this piece of property, this 8.3 acre site, is an extremely important economic development priority for the city. And so whoever ends up acquiring the property, we will work with them to work with them to bring our permit department in. Obviously, there's remediation that needs to happen, and the city we have an actual legal role in ensuring that the remediation is completed. So, there's certainly a lot of work the city's going to be engaged in with the future buyer in helping them realize the vision for the site. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure all this out, and I wanted to kind of get a honest here is like what's happening is there'll be bids taken this next month. These guys will decide who to sell it to. And does the city have any control over that? Because if they don't, why are we here putting in our suggestions about what we want there? It's not up to us or the city.
So yes, I want to thank Cushman and Wakefield and Archon Bean, the court-appointed plan administrator, got that correct, who reached out to us late last year, right around the time that Pacific Steel was closing down operations and they were beginning to put the property on the market. And they said they would like to hear the input of the city of Berkeley. Is the existing zoning okay? Do we want to allow uses within that existing M zoning? Are there additional uses that the city council and the citizens of Berkeley think are appropriate for this site so that they can convey that information to prospective buyers? Obviously, a buyer wants to know what is the zoning going to be when they acquire that property. They either want to know it's going to be M zoning or the city is open to potential flexibility in the zoning. And so the reason we convened this discussion tonight was we want to hear from the community, what is the existing M zoning okay? What uses do you think are appropriate for this site? Are there additional uses that are appropriate? And I'm hearing a strong interest to retain the M zoning, but I'm also hearing some interest in other uses. And so the goal is the city council will be providing actual formal guidance to certainly to whoever is going to be acquiring the property and to our planning department on what are the desired uses for the site. And if zoning changes are needed, we're going to have to initiate that zoning amendment process. But right now it's zoned M. The question we want to know is, do people think the M zoning is okay? Or are there other uses that we think are appropriate for the site? And I think that the prospective buyers want to know, what is the community and what does the city think is appropriate? And if they buy this site, is it just going to be the existing zoning, or are there other uses that could be enabled? Obviously, that will dictate, which people are interested, and ultimately they're going to have to come to the city of Berkeley for permits to permit any particular redevelopment of the site.
So I would say I live right around the corner. I'm on 5th Street in Jones, and I think for most of the residents who live here, what we want is whatever it's going to take to clean it up. And if you have to rezone it so it's not M, in order to get whoever buys it to clean it up, because that's what I'm assuming, the buyer is going to clean it up, right? Correct. Whoever the buyer is, if they're willing to, we want them to clean it up. If you're going to sell it as an M and they say, oh, we don't have to clean it up very much because it's still an M, that's the problem, is getting it cleaned up.
I agree.
Thank you. Sir?
With the one exception, perhaps it would seem likely that a buyer with the size of a Walmart or a Home Depot would have the wherewithal to buy a property like that, and I think we'd end up with a piece of property that's like Davis Street in San Leandro, just a traffic nightmare, the shopping for one corporate giant, which doesn't really serve the city of Berkeley. So they would have deep pockets and they could clean it up, but is that what we would want in Berkeley?
No.
I think we'd look for something, I don't know who the entity would be that would buy it, that we could then subdivide it and put in all these fascinating eco-friendly businesses. So it seems like a real conflict. They got to sell it and make their money too.
So appreciate the concern around environmental cleanup, and I just want to reiterate how important that is to both the mayor and myself as we go through this process. And I know Matthew English is here, I wondered if you could just give us an update on what you know at this point about the environmental cleanup and what that process looks like.
Thank you. So, look, we obviously hear what everyone is saying, and again, because we're a court-appointed fiduciary, our job is to maximize the value, but of course, the cleanup and remediation is an important part of it. As was said, there are different standards, and again, just so everyone understands, I am not an environmental expert, so I'm talking as more of a business layperson here. There obviously are different standards, depending on, like you brought up, depending on how it's zoned, and you'd have to clean up differently if it was a residential versus an M. But the reality is we are working with Cushman and the potential buyers to have a process where there will be remediation work done. That is obviously very important to us, and we understand that. In terms of the phase 2, so as everyone understands, there are different types of reports that are done. There's called a phase 1, and then there's what is called a phase 2. And a phase 2 report is essentially a physical boring or drilling down into the ground to take samples and then to obviously report that information. That is used obviously to develop a remediation plan. We just received the final version of the phase 2 a couple days ago. We have not had a chance to fully review it, but we are obviously working through that right now. As was said by Cushman, this is obviously a very important document that buyers need to look at and that they will use as part of their process. But we obviously take it very seriously, in terms of the environmental. What I can say from my layperson's review of it so far, the results so far appear to be what you would expect for a steel company that's been on the site for 90 years. So what I'm saying is there are things that need to be remediated, absolutely, but it wasn't something that made me, that surprised me. In fact, it was a little bit better than I thought it might be. But again, I'm not an expert, so I can't answer any detailed questions right now. We are still doing our analysis, and again, it was just released to us just a couple days ago. Yes?
Are any underground storage tanks documented or discovered?
I don't know that detail. I believe years ago there may have been some there, but I don't know if there's any more still there at this time.
Are you providing any estimates for remediation?
We are working with our environmental consultant to get those, but we don't have any formal numbers at this time.
Will you do that as part of the sale?
We would like to, because obviously the more certainty that we can give a buyer as to an estimate of remediation helps them obviously get to a formal price quicker. Yes.
I'm wondering why the company who polluted the land doesn't have any liability in the financial ramifications of paying that.
Yeah, very good question. Okay, well the first thing is that obviously we are not the owners. I think we've made that obviously fairly clear. The owners of the property are the original Pacific Steel Casting Company owners, which then owned there's a company called Berkeley Properties, which also was in bankruptcy. And so that property now, as I said, we are the custodians of that property. Then there was because of a unfunded pension liability in the first bankruptcy, one of the pensions, which represents a lot of the same employees, people who work in Berkeley, they have a first deed of trust on the property. So what that means is that in terms of how the proceeds will be paid off, after paying off all the transaction costs and hopefully the remediations, we're going to have to talk to them about kind of order things, then money is going to go to the pension, and then after that the money is going to go to the creditors of the first bankruptcy case. So we're basically are working through that process. Now, to your point, there are obviously federal and state laws around environmental. I'm not an expert in them. But at this point, obviously, the remediation is very important to all of the people who have been related to this. And so it's not that we're letting anybody off the hook. We obviously understand that as part of any sale process to a buyer, that it is going to be, that remediation is going to be a very important part of that.
Will the city be giving any incentives to the purchaser?
Will the city be giving any incentives to the purchaser?
No. But, The question that we are seeking input tonight is the existing zoning appropriate, or are there additional uses or additional zoning standards that could be added for this 8.3 acre site that would enable the flexible redevelopment of these properties?
Thank you.
I think there was a question for Cushman and Wakefield from this gentleman.
Yes. Will you make your phase 2 findings publicly available?
Okay, it's a good question. Will we make our phase 2 findings publicly available? At the current time, we are working with Cushman and Wakefield, obviously, as we described earlier, to get those results over to them. At some point, we would like to release it to Berkeley for the purpose of the Toxics to Management Division, which is the group at Berkeley that we work with. But I can't talk about timing. I don't know yet.
I have a question for the planner. If the property is repurposed as a manufacturing, does that mean that new businesses benefit from the grandfathering in of any parking deficiencies, so no new parking will be created for new jobs?
Good question. Yes, parking can be grandfathered in if the change of use has the same parking standard. And most of these are pretty much a wash in terms of usually 1 space per 1,000 square feet for manufacturing and warehousing and things like that. Some could be 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet if it's more intensive. It's really meant to just deal with the typical daytime population that would be on the site. So if it transfers to something similar to what it is now, there would be no new parking requirement. If it transfers to something more intensive, there would be new parking requirements.
Is there any parking on the site?
There are various, lots that we would have to sort of quantify as far as, is it loading zones, is it, lay down areas, or is it parking? So we would be looking at that.
I happen to know that some of the buildings in West Berkeley, portions of which remain empty because there's a parking deficiency in the neighborhood, and all the existing parking around some of these buildings has been all leased up, and there is no parking to become available. And so what somebody said about how easy it is to subdivide these buildings, it's actually not, because if you subdivide them for true manufacturing uses, then yes, you come in with the same parking deficiency. But if you subdivide them and put a professional office in this part of the building and something else over here and blah, 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 there's no parking. So it's a conundrum, and you end up having to tear down a building to create parking usually.
I would just say, look, that's part of the redevelopment of the property. They will be moving things around. It's a big enough property. I would hope that they would figure that out before they tenanted that.
Steve?
Yes, it's back to Steve Buckley. It might be helpful to know, Steve, if you could just read what is permitted with the zoning certificate in the current zoning code in M. I don't think everybody knows. So if you would just read what someone can do with the ZC in the M zone.
So that's a subset. Like I said, there are different permit thresholds for different kinds of uses and even the size of that use. But a zoning certificate means that someone could move in and establish a new use without a lot of rigmarole, except meeting a parking standard or doing design review if they're doing an exterior model. Sorry. So the zoning would basically allow by right 20,000 square feet of construction, product manufacturing, light manufacturing, warehousing, warehouse-based non-store retailers. So that's Amazon. Internet sales. Wholesale trade. So 20,000 square feet. So that would be each building or part of a building could be subdivided into those sorts of uses, but not more cumulatively of each of those without getting a different kind of permit. Also, by right, dry cleaning plant, arts and crafts studios, thank you, under 10,000 square feet. Recycled product material, media production, under 10,000 square feet. Repair services, and cannabis cultivation. Those are the more intensive ones.
If someone wanted to take like a 40,000 square foot piece and subdivide it to the smallest arts and crafts use, what level of zoning or permitting is required?
Subdividing space, it depends on how big it was to start with.
Like if someone wanted to do a dozen 1,000 footers or 1,500 square footers, could they do that?
You need, well, 2 to 5 spaces can be subdivided by right. And then permits are required for more than that. So we try to, also those are cumulative. So we try not to like piecemeal a bunch of little subdivisions of a big building. But we do allow some subdivision proportional to the size of the building to start with.
Would you have to accommodate parking? You want to break it up into a bunch of artists and craft studios?
Again, only if the uses are more intensive. So that depends on the parking ratios for the different uses.
Would that be contiguous to, you're subdividing, you can't take one way over here, one over there, that have to be contiguous.
The subdividing assumes they're contiguous. It's one building being divided. So I would say, like I said, most parking is 1 space per 1,000 square feet. But as you get bigger, you have a lower ratio, and auto sales is 1 space per 500 square feet. So they're all pretty much a wash, unless you get into some of the more esoteric ones like media production. And I guess arts and crafts.
Can you retail auto sales in there?
You can.
And then if you did that, would you, if say you picked up one of these 40,000 footers, would you have to provide parking to do auto sales on that location?
You'd have to identify the parking, but it could be interior or exterior.
So I'll just say, I'm Steve Smith of Norheim Yost, and I think it's super exciting that this is happening, and I think that there's going to be tons of opportunity for whoever comes in to work within the current zoning, and maybe if the zoning has to adjust at all, maybe it kind of veers toward MULI, but there's all kinds of opportunity in MULI in particular, I think, for anybody. That's all.
Thank you. So why don't we go to Rick and then back to you?
I just want to address the housing. You know, I think everybody agrees we need more housing, and especially housing that's affordable to people. But what's lost in that discussion often is people can't afford housing, whatever kind of housing, unless they have jobs. So I've been, for the last few years, I was on a technical advisory committee from the Association of Bay Area Governments that was looking at the Bay Area and looking at industrial uses and industrial land. And it acknowledged that industrial land is the essential component for good jobs that allow people to have housing and to raise their families. And so it's in process to actually codify and acknowledge what they call priority production areas that will be acknowledged as sources for creating the goods that we need to live and for creating the good jobs that we need to be able to live here. And especially, as I alluded to before, good jobs for people who don't have higher education, which is actually a majority of people in the Bay Area, and even a significant part, 30% of people in Berkeley don't have advanced education. And so, and these kinds of companies that the M zone provides space for, they provide these jobs. There were 400 of them before, up to 400 different times. And as I said before, we're not going to support, our organization doesn't support, polluting industry coming in there, but still, whatever it is, if it's a small arts and crafts or a light manufacturer, they could have 24-hour shifts, they have forklifts, there's grinding, there's sawing, all kinds of things, and they need space, and it's just acknowledged in city planning that putting residents cheek to jowl with industry is just creating conflict. And it creates legal conflict, and eventually enough people complain, and that jobs in industry go away. And the way Berkeley has developed historically, I live in that neighborhood. I live in the mixed-use residential zone. right across the street, there's a big machine shop. That's just the way it is, and, you know, it's, in some instances, it's unfortunate, in a lot of instances, and, you know, I know what you experienced down here, it's very difficult for a very long time. And we had Macaulay Foundry in my neighborhood, which was also, you know, challenging. But we don't believe that this site is going to create those incompatibilities in the future. We would support that. But we absolutely support the job creation that we see could happen on the site, which could be incredible.
So, thank you very much. So I just wanted to ensure that anyone who has not spoken or asked a question, that we give them the opportunity. So yes, Mary?
Hi, Mary White. I'm an artist in Berkeley, and I just want to support this project and say that I named 10 artists who are looking for spaces currently, 1,000, 1,500 range, and that this, I support not changing the design. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet?
My husband and I own 2 commercial buildings in West Berkeley, and we have a variety of tenants along with ourselves working in the buildings. We've had 2 instances where we've had somebody come in and rent, 900 square feet from us, and then go off and find a 5,000 square foot space, luckily on the next block, but there was some space available. And another little company, the guy started in his single car garage a few blocks away, moved into 500 square feet in the corner of our building, and now he's rented a 12,000 square foot warehouse. His idea got bought, he's going to go forward with it, he's going to be a manufacturing person in West Berkeley. And luckily, there was a space available. And unfortunately, it's where El Cerrito Mirror used to be. So I'm sorry to see them go, but somebody else is taking over the space in the same kind of use. And he really had to look for space. This was much bigger than what he wanted to take on, but he feels like he'll be able to handle it as time goes on. So, this is happening in Berkeley. There are small manufacturing companies that need space, and they need to grow. And this is a perfect place for more of that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone else who has not yet offered comments or asked questions, sir?
Are data centers, can you put a data center in this space?
No. Not with the existing zone. Steve?
You can't put zoning, storage area, or can you, Steve?
Any storage?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from anyone who has not yet had an opportunity to speak? Okay, go back to you, yes.
Isn't it safe to say that the business that's there, because it has so much equipment, is a very, that almost anything that went in would be an intensification of use because you'd have less square feet per employee because the equipment would not be as large. So it would create the need for increased parking. It's just a problem. I live very close to Gilman and San Pablo, and there's no parking for some of those buildings to get fully leased out. There's all kinds of space in West Berkeley that's not being used.
So we hear your desire that there be adequate parking as part of any redevelopment of the property, that the parking impacts are not externalized onto businesses and
help
residents.
people understand that we can't just paint these buildings and put artists in them because A, they're going to have carcinogenic materials in them. B, who's going to pay for the site to be remediated so craftsmen and artists can live there? It's a wonderful idea, but unless the city chalks up the money, it's not going to happen. So what can go in there? A cannabis growing business? Hello, I don't want that in my neighborhood, period. We're talking about 10,000 square feet and maybe 3 or 4 jobs. I don't think so. That's not a good use of space when 2,000 people could live on the same plot of land.
Okay, thank you. So before we wrap up, I just want to make sure if anyone who has not yet spoken or asked a question, give you the opportunity to do so. Okay, thank you all for coming tonight. Just want to summarize next steps. So the purpose of tonight was just to get initial feedback from the community around what is the appropriate zoning and uses for this 8.3 acre site. We did mail postcards to all the adjacent property owners around the Pacific Steel site. We've obviously done some notice, Councilor Kesarwani and I, to our email newsletter on social media. And so we will be summarizing some of the comments that we received this evening. And the idea is in May, the Berkeley City Council will have a discussion about the future of Pacific Steel, summarizing the comments that we received. We also encourage you to please send us comments in writing, any input that you may have in writing about the existing zoning or potential uses or redevelopment of the site. We encourage you to please sign in if you have not already, so we can send you additional information. And in May, the Berkeley City Council will take the information that we received, the comments. We have received some comments by email, as well as the verbal comments that we've received, and then provide some direction to our planning department around the zoning. So that will be a public meeting. We'll provide information about that discussion, and we encourage you all to participate as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Berkeley Rep for hosting us. And I want to also thank Lars Schirping from my office, who helped coordinate tonight's event. Thank you very much for helping put this event together. And thank you to Councilmember Kesarwani's office as well. So thank you all for coming.